Good day everyone, MindFlareRetro back finally with another video. Sorry it's been so long, but better late than never. So let's get to it. A gentleman contacted me about a Commodore 64 he won in a local community auction, and apparently it's having some issues. He has just dropped it off to me in its original box full of interesting manuals and user guides and Commodore 64 games. Cool. Someone paid a lot of money for color photocopies of Compute's first book of Commodore 64 games. Probably would have been cheaper just to buy the actual book. Anyway, here's the computer with the problem, still under its dust cover. And it looks pretty good at first glance. Clean and cosmetically not damaged. Let's get it out of its box and have a closer look. From what I can see, this C64 bread bin has been stored really well. It is very clean except for some minor dust, and I don't see any damage on top. The case itself is in very good condition with minimal to no yellowing and no damage from what I can see. And so far so good. Again, the owner of this Commodore 64 did say that it didn't turn on and he wants to get it working because he wants to introduce his young son to retro computing and Commodore 64 basic programming. Who wouldn't want to do that? So let's flip it over and open it up. Oh, there's a bit of damage. This is not entirely uncommon. I have seen these vent fins break off before, especially when the computers get older. The plastic gets brittle and they can snap off with any kind of a bump. Here's the serial number tag on the bottom of the case. This particular C64 was produced in the United States at the Westchester, Pennsylvania assembly facility, denoted by the letter P at the start of the serial number. Okay, let's get inside this thing and see what's what. Clearly it hasn't been open in a while because these hinges are really tight. And they're going to need some coaxing. There we go. Again, a wee bit dusty at first glance, but we need to get in here a little deeper and get a closer look at everything. Okay, screwdriver, where are you? Here we are inside, and it's time to do a flyover of this boardscape. The three large caps are original, but look to be in good condition. This is the VIC-2 chip, PLA, logic ICs, and RAM. Oh, and what do we have here? Obviously, someone's been in here before doing repairs. There's a jumper wire from one of the RAM ICs to another, and I see all kinds of flux residue on these RAM ICs as well as some of the other ones, so I wonder if some of these have been replaced. Let's take a closer look. Man, these two RAM chips look like crap. Where are the markings on them? The big in-your-face jumper indicates that somebody found a broken trace at some point. Again, this flux residue around some of the legs also indicates that these are replacement chips. So at this point I really want to see the underside of the board, so I'm going to desolder these tabs that hold the bottom RF shield on, and we'll be... Hey, did you just see that? This tab was already broken off. It just lifted when I applied heat with a soldering iron. Let's take a look at another one. This tab is conveniently pre-broken as well. Again, as soon as I applied heat with the soldering iron, it just popped off. So somebody's been in here and presumably has done stuff. We are now looking at the underside of this Commodore 64 motherboard, and straight away there is glaring evidence that it has undergone a repair, perhaps several repairs, in the past. Every one of the memory chips has rosin flux residue on all of their pins, and other points of the board look like they have been reflowed or components have been replaced. Here's a closer look at a couple of the RAM chips. Man, that is some serious Jurassic Park amber on those pins. I think this board deserves a bit of a scrub-a-dub with IPA before we carry on. The bottom of the board now clean. I want to take a closer look at these RAM ICs because they all look like they've been either reflowed or replaced. But before I do that, I want to pull out all of the primary ICs, clean their sockets, and then reseat them. Holy moly, these CIA chips feel like they're welded in place. I'm going to leave them alone for the time being and just go ahead and clean the sockets that I've already exposed. And to clean the sockets, I use a little bit of 𝑑𝑜xit D5. It actually comes in an aerosol can, but I spray a little bit into my little bottle here so that I can dip in a swab, like so, and apply the 𝑑𝑜xit manually to all the socket connections. 𝑑𝑜xit products might be difficult to find if you're located in Europe, but in that case, look for Teslanol T6, an excellent alternative. 𝘱𝑦𝑛𝑑𝑇ℎ𝑒𝑚𝑒 swears by it. There we go, and now we've cleaned all the sockets, so I'm actually going to apply a little bit of 𝑑𝑜xit to all the legs of the ICs as well. Sockets and legs now cleaned. Let's get these chips back where they belong. Right, so the primary ICs are freshened up and back in place. I've got my C64 saver plugged in, and we're going to throw the switch and see what's happening. We have a video signal, and nothing else. Okay, I'm back in this C64, and I want to turn my attention to the 8 RAM chips, especially the 2 highly suspicious ones with that jumper. And here's another observation. You see all that liquid staining on the top of all of the chips? I wonder if someone prior to me might have been spraying this area with isopropyl alcohol, an acceptable quick and dirty electronics repair diagnostic method, just to see if any chips on a circuit board are overheating. Very often, a chip that has failed will either be stone cold on a running board or will get overly hot. And of course, isopropyl alcohol will evaporate quickly from an overheated chip. So let's grab a bottle of IPA and give this board a spray. The C64 has been powered onto a black screen for the last few minutes, and let's give it a spray. Wow, did you see that? The alcohol evaporated almost instantly from U9 and U12. That's more than warm. Ouch, that is hot. These are all really... That one is burning. U12 is burning. I can't even touch it. Let's give it another blast of IPA. Wow, all those RAM chips are abnormally hot. And just in case you missed it the first time, that little guy is nutso hot. How hot is it really, you ask? Well, let's find out. Wow, this one RAM chip alone is well over 100 degrees Celsius, hot enough to boil water, and still rising. Aw man, my workbench computer monitor decided to cack out on me. More repair content for the channel, I guess. A new temporary monitor is in place, and I've got my dead test cartridge plugged in, and I'm going to turn on the computer and see what the dead test cartridge shows. And we're seeing screen flashes, as opposed to the normal interface. As I'm sure many of you already know, this is the dead test cartridge telling us something, and in this case it's telling us it's found some bad RAM. For those of us that need a refresher, let's take a quick look at the dead test cartridge manual from 1988. If we scroll to page 2-2, we get an explanation of the flash codes. If you've ever used a Commodore dead test cartridge, you'll know that there is no video output from anywhere from 5 to 15 seconds. During this little blackout period, there's actually something very important going on. The dead test diagnostic software is running a power-up RAM test in an attempt to identify any bad RAM ICs on the board. If a RAM error is detected, the screen will begin to flash in a series of repeating flash codes. Defective RAM ICs are indicated by the number of flash codes in the series. We can then refer to the RAM error flash code chart seen here to determine which RAM IC is being cited as defective. In our case, we're seeing one flash indicating that the RAM IC at position U12 is defective. And go figure, that's our hunka burning RAM. Obviously the RAM IC at U12 needs to be replaced. I've identified it here on the bottom of the board, pointing at it with this little piece of tape. I'm going to add some fresh solder to each of the existing leg points, and then I'm going to use my desoldering gun to desolder it. Uh-oh. Well, that's not good. Clearly, a lot of the traces were damaged during desoldering. In fact, most of these through-hole pads look like they're starting to lift off the motherboard. This is really bad. Now, I haven't done anything differently than I would normally do to desolder these types of pins. I add a bit of fresh solder, I use my Hako desoldering gun at medium heat, and I don't think I'm being overly aggressive with the desoldering gun to cause this type of damage. Anyway, let's extract this chip and see if there's any kind of damage on this side of the board. And as I've learned from other retro computer peeps, these MOSTEC DRAMs are, well, poo, and are prone to failing, as we are seeing here. A little side note for clarification. MOSTEC, the company that manufactured our problem RAM here, is not the same company as MOS Technology, the company that manufactured all of Commodore's custom ICs. And of course, that includes the very popular 6502 processor line and all of its variants. And back to our troubled motherboard, this is the top side of the U12 socket footprint that we removed the problem RAM from, and you can see all of the through-hole pads here are just as bad as the bottom and appear to be lifting off the PCB surface. Fortunately, I still have a collection of new old stock 4164 DRAM ICs, and I have a feeling we're going to be using more than one on this project. And of course, good practice dictates that we first install a dip socket into this compromised space. It is definitely not good form to solder on a brand new RAM IC onto these already unhappy through-hole connectors. I'm going to solder the socket pins in place as best I can by first applying some liquid flux. You'll notice that some of the pads are completely missing from this side of the board. And fortunately, these pins are not connected to any traces on the bottom side of the board. And my hope is the liquid flux will allow the solder to flow through the damaged holes and make proper connections on the top side of the board. Okay, that's quite a bit of solder applied, and not the prettiest job, but hopefully made the connections we need. Socket is installed, and now the new chip is installed. Let's try the dead test cartridge again and see what we get. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now 6 flashes tells us that we have an issue with another RAM IC, the one at U22, and if we give it the touch test, it too is hot and needs replacing. Well, continuing on with this method has led me to replace 4 of the 8 RAM ICs, and I think it's time we stop wasting time and just replace all the RAM, especially these sketchy ones with no markings on them at all, and the MOSTEC branded ones. And all RAM chips have been replaced. Was it easy to do? Absolutely not. If you remember the RAM IC with the red bodge wire, it came out easily, but one of the pins had a broken trace, hence the bodge wire. And then things got much worse. This is an example of just one of the pictures that I sent the owner just to let him know where I was at with this repair. Even with moderate desoldering temperatures and dwell times, it seemed like every pad wanted to lift off this board. Even after all 8 RAM chips were replaced, I still had to go pin by pin looking for continuity problems because of broken traces. In this photo you can see the original bodge wire we saw at the beginning of the video has been moved to the bottom of the board. That's the orange one on top. And I also found 3 other continuity faults between 2 of the RAM ICs, seen here at the bottom of the picture. Now, I don't know if these are pre-existing faults or if I created them during the abnormally troublesome desoldering process. I'll take half the blame. Okay, with all RAM replaced, let's see where we're at with dead test cartridge. Come on. Whoa, that took a while. No RAM faults, but clearly something else is wrong. And out of curiosity, let's try this again without the dead test cartridge installed and see if we still have a black screen. Aha! Signs of life. Well, alien life. At least we're not seeing a black void, which means we are on the right track. Taking a step back for a second, I've come to realize that I forgot to do something really important. I've been so focused on bad RAM and bad traces and bad pads, I haven't tested any of the primary ICs of this Commodore 64. So I'm going to do that now just to get it out of the way and make sure that all of these chips are fully functional. You may recognize this as my everyday C64 bread bin tester board. Thankfully, all the primary ICs in our problem C64 are socketed, so it was easy to install them in this board, especially with the ZIF sockets. And in the event you miss this project, I'll post a link up there and down there. Although I do have the diagnostic loopback harness attached, I think I'm going to power up these chips just to see if we get our standard ready power on screen. And yes, we do, with the correct amount of RAM, telling us that these primary ICs are likely in good operating condition. However, I will run this again with the diagnostic cartridge plugged in just to make sure. Okay, as expected and wished for, the primary ICs test as fully functional. I'm going to now put them back into the SICK C64 and we can continue on with our diagnostics. Our tested primary ICs have been replaced back into the SICK motherboard. I have not replaced the SID chip because it's not necessary that it be present for any further diagnostics at this point, and we want to protect it from any unnecessary damage. With all primary ICs and RAM ICs being operational, we have to start looking at something else, and that would be the logic ICs. And what's the deal with these logic ICs anyway? To better appreciate the purpose of the logic ICs, we need to better understand how the C64 RAM actually works. Okay, so stay with me here. The majority of C64 breadbin versions use 8 64 kilobit by 1 bit DRAM ICs utilizing a relatively new addressing concept at the time called multiplexing. Multiplexing DRAM technology uses a matrix of row and column address lines to identify specific bit data on each chip and is written to or read from over 2 bus cycles. What does this mean? It means that DRAM ICs could be manufactured in physically smaller packages with fewer pins, perfect for use in smaller footprint home microcomputers of the 1980s. So why do we care about this? Well, my point is, using DRAM was a somewhat complicated task at the time and required a number of supporting logic ICs, multiplexers, demultiplexers, quad bilateral switches, and other crazy sounding ICs in order to effectively translate and transport DRAM data to and from the other ICs on the board. If even one part of a supporting logic IC isn't working, then there is a cascade of missing or incorrect data to and from the primary C64 ICs, causing all kinds of problems including garbage video output like we are seeing here. This is a printout of Ray Carlson's C64 chips versus common symptoms troubleshooting reference. This highly useful reference guide lists all the chips on a Commodore 64 along with the symptoms of any known faults with those chips. So, for example, in our case here, we are seeing, for lack of a better term, garbage on the screen. We know that the VIC-2 chip and the character ROM chip are functioning normally because they worked fine in our test board. And fortunately, Ray Carlson has documented several logic ICs that, if faulty, can be the cause of garbage on the screen. So we're going to take a look at those. I'm going to start by probing the address and data pins of the multiplexer located at U13. This is a MOS branded 7708 IC, and these are known to have a high failure rate, so probably a good place to start. Unfortunately, I don't have any video of the probing sessions, but I did take some still shots of some interesting things I discovered. This is a normal signal measured off one of the data pins. What we're looking at here is a 5-volt peak-to-peak pulse, which we would expect to see from a normally functioning chip. This, on the other hand, is not normal at all. This is another data pin on the same chip, but this one is not pulsing. The signal in this chip is stuck high, indicating an internal failure, so obviously this chip needs to be replaced. Again, the defective chip was a MOS 7708 multiplexer. It was removed and a socket installed. And this time we're using a much higher quality direct replacement, the Texas Instruments 74LS257. Have we solved our problem? Let's find out. I'm going to turn on the computer without the dead test cartridge, and no, we have solved absolutely nothing. And thus begins a lengthy and totally annoying merry-go-round of frustration. Probing, desoldering, running out of sockets, running out of logic ICs, ordering sockets and logic chips from China, waiting 3+ weeks for my order, apologizing to my customer for the delay, installing new sockets and logic chips, seeing that it still doesn't fix the problem, researching, more probing, more looking for bad traces, finding and fixing more bad traces, still doesn't work, unclogging the toilet, ordering more logic chips from eBay that I didn't think I would need to replace, waiting another 3 weeks for my order, getting impatient waiting for my order, sourcing the stuff I ordered locally, paying too much for the locally sourced stuff, drinking, apologizing to my customer again, researching again, getting a bright idea, failing again, and thinking about giving up. U16 pin 11, pin 11, U16 pin 10, U16 pin 9. And so this repair dragged on for weeks, many weeks. I had been staring at this problem for so long, it was about time I stepped back, and perhaps finally reaching out for help. So I posted all the difficulties I was having on Twitter, and that caught the attention of my friend Mitchell, better known as Aphex Technol, on Twitter and on YouTube. And of course, being a C64 repair guru, wanted more details on what was going on with this faulty board. So I sent him all the details of what was going on and not going on. Aphex Technol then kindly offered to take a look at the board. And by this point, I had been staring at it for so long, I was happy to offer it up to a fresh pair of eyes. So I packed up the motherboard and sent it off on a little journey.
Hello there, YouTube. This is Aphex Technol. I'm a part-time YouTuber, I guess you could say, but I'm a full-time Commodore maniac, specifically 64s. I have my own little YouTube channel that I upload on every once in a while, mainly Commodore 64 repairs and that sort of a thing. Pretty much a Commodore hardware fetishist, I guess you could say. Anyways, this is the motherboard that MindFlareRetro sent to me. and he was having some severe difficulties in repairing it, to put it lightly. As you can see, he pretty much socketed everything on the board, and yeah, he couldn't figure out what the problem with it was. And as you can see now, it works. So let me do a couple clips here and kind of show you what was wrong with it and how I figured out the faults. Alright, here's the back of the motherboard in question, and as you can see, this is the the state that the board is in now. It's been soldered on so many times now that lots and lots of pads are missing. As you can tell by the jumper wires, some traces went along with it. It was pretty much a nightmare. Now, this jumper here, and these were all jumpers that he had found himself. And these jumpers over here, this one and this one, are the ones that I found and fully repaired the machine. This particular jumper was the main one keeping it from working. That goes to these 257 memory multiplexer. Now if you look at it over here, see if I can rotate it around and get a little better light. You can see get something to point with here. Right here, this pin on the 74LS 257 multiplexer goes to this via right here, and that was the main thing keeping the board from starting up. He had found all of the other bad traces in the RAM area, and I probably spent 2 or 3 hours with the logic probe and then the scope poking around on this thing trying to figure out what the issue was. And eventually, when I inspected the board very, very closely, I seen a little shine of copper right here at the edge of this socket. And I thought, I wonder if that connection's broken. And believe me, when I put the meter on it and didn't get any continuity, I was pretty excited. So I went ahead and ran that jumper wire and the board fired up. When the board fired up, however, I was still having a problem with the color SRAM. Most of the screen had proper colors, except for there was a few columns and errors on the right hand side. So I went ahead and pulled the color SRAM chip and I tested it at my chip testing board, and it was fine. I kind of figured the chip was fine, but since the board's already got so many sockets, I said why not, threw a socket in there. So then I started doing the fun process of going through checking continuity to everything connected to the color SRAM. And then I discovered that I believe it's pin 4 here. Pin 4 connects to the address bus A1, and you should have continuity between here and pin 5 on the 74LS373. You also get continuity up here on like the ROMs and such, because they're all connected to the address bus as well. And I had continuity from here to the 373, but I didn't have it from here to here. So that is when I figured out to add this lovely little jumper wire here. So anyways, that's basically the short explanation of what I did to figure this thing out. And believe me, it's not an easy thing when you have a board that's full of known working good chips, and you can't trust the connections and traces on the board. Because when you're sitting there trying to figure it out just based on the symptoms alone, and this board was presenting symptoms that I had never seen before. Yeah, I'm not afraid to admit that. I fixed lots and lots of Commodore 64s, but I don't know if anybody's ever seen every possible permutation of Commodore 64, error before. As a final demonstration of the board working, I have it hooked up to the old diagnostic test harness. And one more thing, I misspoke here. I was calling, I believe it was this pin 4, when in actuality it's pin 5. You count the pins on ICs by starting at the upper left-hand corner here, usually where the notch or the dot is. Like these chips have notches. These have dots. So you've got pins, for instance, on this chip here, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then you cross over 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So anyways, if you didn't know that already, now you know. Let's fire the diagnostic test harness. So yeah, he had originally sent this board to me, and I had offered to just trade him outright for a working board of the same type. And I just wanted to fix the board myself to see if I could do it. And I had no real, intentions of fixing the board so quickly. And now that I have, I think I'm just going to send him this board back because, he's put a lot of work into this board already, and I only ran a couple jumper wires to get it fixed. So, I mean, I appreciate that he's happy that I fixed it, but the reality is he did the majority of the work. So, there you go. The board has passed the diagnostic test harness, so I would pretty much consider this a fully working Commodore at this point. So anyways, thanks for watching my video, and if you guys want to check out my YouTube channel, I'd appreciate that. Take care.
Our once very sick Commodore 64 motherboard is back. Thanks to the amazing efforts of Aphex Techno, we now have a fully functional Commodore 64 motherboard. Aha, and we have a note enclosed. And of course, the note is typed on a vintage typewriter. In this case, a 1967 Adler TIPA 1. If you follow Aphex Techno on Twitter, you already know he's not only a retro repair guru, but he also collects and expertly refurbishes vintage typewriters. Well, alright, I'm anxious to look at this. And here's a look at our repaired Commodore 64 motherboard back to its full functional glory. A lot of ICs had to be replaced, including most of the logic chips and all of the RAM. And when all was said and done, 8 jumpers were required. And of course, Aphex Techno was kind enough to resolder the bottom RF shield back onto the ground edge rail of the motherboard, leaving things nice and tidy. And now we have to get the board back into its case. However, we have a couple of problems. We have several broken and some damaged mounting posts. Unfortunately, this is a common sight as the plastic gets more brittle with age. And I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 missing posts, and we have 1, 2 cracked posts that can be reinforced. And to reinforce these posts, I'm simply using clear Gorilla Glue, applying it around the perimeter of the post, adding much needed support when a screw is reinserted. As for the missing posts, I'm going to use PCB Supports. I want to get this computer back to its owner because I've had it for far too long, and this is the quickest and simplest method for securing the PCB back to the bottom of the case. I've selected 5mm standoffs with a self-adhesive back, and in order for them to stick well, I'm going to use a little bit of sandpaper to score the surface. I've smoothed out the surface of all the missing posts with sandpaper and then cleaned with IPA, and this is how the adhesive risers are going to sit. Need to make sure my alignment is right before I apply, and what I'm going to do is press down and hold and get my fingers in there for about a minute and then move on to the next one. The adhesive risers are installed, and I've left them alone for 24 hours before trying to insert the motherboard. But it's now time. Everything lines up and it all looks good. All that's left to do is replace the screws into the 2 damaged but reinforced posts. And 3 final screws completes the reassembly. This C64 bread bin was in its original box and also covered in the box with a dust cover, so there isn't much to clean up at all. And finally, after many troublesome weeks, our very sick C64 is back to full health and looking fine. Thankfully, I didn't have an aneurysm trying to repair this, and thankfully, Aphex Technol was there to have my back. Another one saved. Now, before I return this C64 to its owner, I did test the original power supply that came with it under a light load, and it is outputting a stable 5 volts, for now. And yes, I did inform the owner that a C64 saver or similar overvoltage protection device is highly recommended, and he's going to track one down. Or I could supply him with one myself, assuming I can get off my butt and get BWAC's C64 Saver version 2 project out of the gate. Stay tuned for that. Anyway, before I pack this up, I want to do one final test with an old favorite. Super Zaxxon! Well, that's it for this little retro repair adventure. A huge thanks to Aphex Technol, who helped me out when things were looking pretty grim. If you're a retro computer repair enthusiast and you haven't done so already, head on over to Aphex Technol's YouTube channel and subscribe. Also, follow him on Twitter. Aphex Technol once told me he's never seen a Commodore 64 board that can't be fixed, and he proves that every time, so be sure to subscribe and follow. Links are below. And I do have a small announcement. My little retro computer repair channel has joined the world of Patreon. If you enjoy watching my content and say to yourself, hey, maybe I'd like to support this channel, then please head over to my Patreon page by following the link below. I do realize that there are a lot of members in the retro computer community supporting one or more retro computer YouTube channels. But if you haven't done so yet and you think it might be time to jump in, then your consideration would be greatly appreciated. Thanks very much to all my subscribers, new and old. I know it's been a while since I posted a retro repair video, but I have a lot of interesting projects and other interesting content coming down the pike. And I'm working on streamlining how I do things on my end, so videos should be a lot more frequent. Okay, time to wrap it up, so I am out of here. Thanks for watching, thanks for your time, and I'll see you again soon.